Okay guys, quiz time. You have 6-5 of hearts in the cutoff. You open. The big blind calls. The flop comes king 9 for rainbow and you c-bet for 1/3 pot. The big blind defends and you hit your third pair on the turn. The big blind checks. What are you going to do? Pause the video and answer the following quiz. Are you going to A, check? Are you going to B, bet small? Or are you going to C, overbet? Pretend you didn't read the title of this video. You can leave your answer down below. You can explain it once you've done that. Get back to watching. Here is my take on the matter. If you answered A, check, that's fine. You can definitely check here. It's a solid play. And for those of you who are first starting out in poker or you're fairly new, there's nothing wrong at all with just checking the middle of your range on the turn in position until you get a bearing for the exceptions, of which this is one. Number 2, bet small. If you answered that, then I'm afraid to say you have failed poker. You've disappointed me, probably disappointed your family and loved ones, and you don't deserve to play the game. Get out of here. Like, literally just leave the video. And if you answered overbet, which you probably did, right? Because you saw the title and you were like, I know this is an overbet. Well done. That's also a really valid answer. Let's talk about why each of these options got the verdict it did there. Option A of checking is, of course, fine. You've showdown value, the check EV is quite high, you're entitled to quite a lot of this pot by checking, and it's not immediately clear that betting would be better than checking, right? Because after all, it doesn't appear that the usual two reasons for betting, which are, of course, value and bluffing, apply here. It doesn't look like value applies because most of the hands that villain calls your bet with are going to be better hands than a pair of sixes, and you're going to be quote-unquote behind. And if you bluff here, it doesn't look like villain's folding that many better hands. Okay, they're folding 7s probably, and 8s, and maybe some of their 9x, but they're definitely calling all of their king x, you would think, and any 2-pair plus. So on the surface of it, it doesn't look like enough better hands are going to be folding or worse hands are going to be calling for a bet like this to be okay. So why is this okay? Why is it the case that GTO Wizard says the following?
Actually, it's okay to overbet the turn with third pair, yes.
No, really, that's what GTO Wizard says. Have a look. As we can see, 6-5 suited in this spot is overbetting sometimes and checking sometimes. Okay, there are 4,812 different sizes being used here, and the sim is suggesting that all of them are fine at some tiny frequency. It's sort of funny, actually, if you look at the EV of this. The size that's the worst is actually going to be this half pot type sizing, no 3/4 pot type sizing is the worst. And then a smaller bet appears to be okay in EV terms, and then a bigger bet appears to be okay. And what's going on here is that the bigger you go, when you start overbetting, you get more and more better hands than yours to fold, right? You're making villain fold some 9x, pocket 8s, pocket 7s, things like that. And if you go really small, you might be getting called by enough worse hands now for it to make some sense. But the no man's land sizing here is like half pot to B75 or something. But today I want to focus on why overbetting is okay, because it's definitely the least intuitive option here if you're a beginner. And this is actually an option that we refer to as hybrid betting. We talk about this in grade 2 lecture 6 for the first time. A hybrid bet can be explained in the following way. Imagine that there's a sink, or basin if you're American, and the sink is being filled up by 3 different taps, or faucets if you're American. The first tap is called the value tap. The more value you're getting from worse hands, the more the betting sink is filling up. The second tap, the one in the middle, is called bluff. And the more better hands than yours are folding, the more that is contributing to the sink being filled up. The third tap or faucet is known as denial. Some people call this protection. It's all to do with making hands that are behind you, but quite live, that can redraw easily, fold. And the more of those live hands are folding that you're vulnerable to, the more that tap is filling up the sink. On the sink, there are a few lines that measure how full the basin is. The first line reads, can bet if the 3 taps are filling the sink up to this point, then it won't be an EV loss to bet whatever sizing we're currently running this experiment for. Above that, there's another line called must bet. If these taps, or one of them or 2 of them, are flowing really, really heavily, then it may be the case that checking isn't even allowed and you just have to bet your hand in theory. So if we come back to the 6-5 suited here, and we imagine how the basin is being filled, we can explain how each of the taps is contributing and contributing quite heavily. Firstly, the value tap is contributing in two different ways. One way that this is a value bet, and don't get me wrong, it's not sufficiently a value bet. It's not a value bet in the same sense that betting aces here is a value bet. It's not enough in and of itself. But the reason that this hand has some value elements to it, as I like to say, is twofold. Firstly, we can be called by worse hands. A sizable chunk of a big blind defense range against an overbet in this spot is going to be something like 4 or 5 of clubs, or ace 7 of clubs, or queen jack of clubs, or something like that. These are hands that we're actually a favorite against, and we can check back on river and win unimproved against if they call us. When we overbet, moreover, most humans and even solvers are not going to play much of a raise strategy against us. It's going to be a really rare thing. So we don't have to worry too much about those worse hands raising us. So one way that we get value is being called by worse. The other way we get value is by having a hand that can value bet again on the river. Now, we don't have that currently, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that our hand is our hand and we need to get lucky to win and we're chasing very few outs here. That's not all we're doing, but the fact that we can hit the 6 here and the 5, and the fact that these cards are very clean is extremely important for this bet having a value element to it. Imagine villain calls here and the river is the 6 of spades. What does villain's calling range look like? That's right, it's mostly going to be king X, but it's going to be some 9x, especially 9x of clubs, and it's going to be some 4x of clubs and all the other stuff. Many of those hands are going to pay you off on a 6 river because it does not look like you can have a lot of trips in your range, and you actually don't have a lot of trips in your range. The third pair is going to be a rare guest here. It's combinatorically not very abundant, and you're not always going to overbet, in theory at least, when you do have it. So we could call a 6 or a 5 here a very high implied odds card, because unlike a card like the Queen of Clubs, we're getting called by a lot of those one pair hands when we hit those cards. Whereas to pay us off on a club river, villain's normally going to want to have a club blocker, worst flush, bigger hand, 2 pair or something like that. And so, therefore, we're usually going to block their calling range by having that flush, and we get paid off therefore a bit less often. When we have 6-5, we unblock their paying us off range on the river, and we're liable to actually get paid off more by a human. Exploitatively speaking, they're more likely to over-defend that kind of brick river. So that's the value element, comes from those two things. The bluff element comes from, and I think this is pretty simple, villain folding a hand like pocket 7s, or pocket 8s, or 10-9 of spades, or something like that. Villain folding a better hand than ours. Even pocket 10s here is going to be pretty damn indifferent against an overbet on the turn and could well fold. That's very juicy for us. When your opponent's folding a hand that's a big favorite against you, that you're only winning 5 outs of the time against, that's a huge success. So it's not difficult to see why the bluff tap is filling up that betting sink. The third thing, and this is rarely a sufficient reason for betting in and of itself, it's denial. Denying equity. If villain has a hand like Jack 10 and you let them see the river, they are going to have a lot of outs to outdraw your 6-5. They could also just bluff you off the best hand sometimes, depending on what card comes on the river and what happens there. But they could certainly hit a Jack, hit a 10, or hit a Queen. That's a lot of cards. That's 10 outs that they could have there with Jack 10. 20% equity, there or thereabouts, to win the pot from you just by hitting. Not to mention the times they bluff. So the bluff element is strong here. The value element is strong here. The denial element is strong here. And while none of those individually is a sufficient reason for betting this turn for an overbet, all of them together are. And that's what hybrid betting entails, my friends. And look, it worked out wonderfully. The 9 of diamonds came on the river. By the way, this is a card villain should absolutely consider leading on, because we have king 9 and 9s way less often now. Villain called the turn with a ton of 9x of clubs. We don't overbet 9x of clubs on the turn. That's too good to overbet as a bluff, but not good enough for value. That is actually a polarization mistake. We can't do that. But villain can have 9x of clubs and even some other combos like ace 9 here pretty frequently. 9-6, king 9. They can build a leading range on this card. Probably at low stakes poker, they're not going to do that, right? In the games that most of you play, but they probably should. So when villain checks, we have a very, very clear check. One, they've missed the donk bet. that they should have been making for value, and they probably overloaded their checking range with newly made trip combos. 2, they still just have a ton of King X to boot. And 3, we win when they have the flush draw portion. So if we lose to the King that isn't going to fold that much, we lose to the 9 that's never going to fold, and we're beating a hand like the, well, A7 of clubs anyway, then we just want to check, right? So very important that we check back this river. So let's recap. There's a sink that's being filled up with taps, and usually just one of the taps is enough for betting, and usually that's either value or it's bluffing. But in the case of hybrid betting, that sink is being filled by multiple taps, and there are lots of things going on, and all of them together constitute sufficient reasons for betting. I have a few more qualifiers here that I wrote down that are grounds for doing this with third pair. What you really want to make sure is that your third pair outs are clean. If this board was like Jack 10, 9, 8, 4, and you had like fourth pair or something, 4 or 5, and it was 3 to a flush already, you're not going to use that as an overbet bluff. You're not really going to be overbetting that spot at all. But imagine that, right? You've just got some worthless hand that's drawing to something that's dead a lot when called. Villain's going to call you with straights and flushes on that sort of run out. Your outs are terrible. They're not clean. There's no implied odds on them. If you hit them, you meekly check back. You're not value betting again. All this sort of stuff. The second thing is that villain has some draws that can call you, right? There are worse hands in your third pair. And the third thing is that there are a good amount of better hands that can fold. If all of those things are true, then you have my blessing and the blessing of GTO Wizard.
Yes, you may bet, my child.
And the blessing of GTO Lizard. And even the blessing of Pile Solver, who, as we know, is like a very antisocial robot that would rather not appear on camera or speak. So there we have it. This is a good idea. If you like theoretical concepts like this, if you want to expand your repertoire of theoretical knowledge, check out the Carrot Poker School. Check out our full scholarship, or even, hell, do the Golden Carrot. Do everything we've ever done. It's all at carrotcorner.com if you want to watch more from me. And I'll be back with more videos like this soon. By the way, if you like this short form video, if you like the kind of highly edited, compact, straight to the point type content, let me know in the comments and hit the like button. I really want to see what you guys like. It gives me a sense of what to keep making. It helps promote the channel, gain subscribers. We need to, you know, fight these days. Poker YouTube is competitive. Let me know if you like this stuff. I want to optimize what you guys are watching. I want to get it right. Have fun overbetting third pair on the turn. And I'll see you for the next video. Bye for now.